some absolutely, I thought, were amazing speeches, all sort of, created in isolation, but actually each one connected together. And as you heard at the end, all the speakers think now that basically we need to have a agenda which is very consumer driven, making sure that sustainability is understood by the people that live in those houses, but also making sure that we create buildings which are sustainable and healthy as well. So what do you think? What are the questions that you want to ask this panel to try and sort of explore that a little bit further? Yes.
Andy, can you just confirm what the status of the space standards are, and why has it got such a stupid name?
The stupid name is probably down to civil servants who have an ability to create names and labels for things that are disconnected from the outside world. How the space standard works, there is a space standard which is a national space standard, i.e. it's recognised that that space standard is able to be applied. If it is to be applied, it has to be that one single standard. It comes through the planning process, so you have to have it bedded in a local plan, and that's the rub. The local authority has to go through a process to demonstrate first it needs it, it can afford it, and there's a justification for it, which then goes to a planning inspector to sign off, and then it gets bedded in the plan. The local authority then has to negotiate with developers, or the developer still has the option to come to the local authority and say, even if it's in the local plan, I want to negotiate a different. So the whole thing is mired in bureaucracy and in procedure that just is for cash-strapped local authorities who are short of resources, a process that local authorities feel is not a priority for them. As a consequence of that, I don't know what the take-up from local authorities is, but it's far less than I think government had expected. And hence they're exercising a review sometime soon as to how many local authorities have gone through that process. What they should have done is say this is a standard right across the piece, and given the option for local authorities to make the argument why it wouldn't work in their end. So instead of being something you voluntarily opt into, it should have been something that you opt out of, and that would have worked.
Can I extend that question? Do you think local authorities are as engaged in this debate as they need to be in terms of looking at development, looking at sustainability, looking at opportunities? Or are they slightly worried and scared by viability, conversations about standards, resources, skills within their own department? Do you think they're actually able to respond to some of the challenges we heard today?
In their own right, no, not at the moment. I think that though they are very mindful of the fact that they need to promote good quality in their areas. I think there's a lack of understanding of planning committees about what they're looking at sometimes in terms of quality and how they secure the delivery of that quality through the planning process is very dubious. But I think you'll find local authorities, certainly the ones that I'm encountering on the estate regeneration side, are very conscious of their responsibilities to deliver better environments, but they're looking to partner with developers to deliver that. So in some ways it's got to come through either the housing association or the private developer to make sure that these agenda items are delivered.
Good point. Questions? Bill.
Question for Claire. Do you think this RICS valuation that produces potential valuations for this increased quality
for placemaking,
how quickly do you think that's actually going to hit the property development market?
You mean the study itself? Or
is
the
value is actually listening, and is it actually going to be adopted?
Well, I think
when I do my next red book, am I going to get? Am I going to see this?
Well, this is what we're pushing for. Actually, really, I think that's an interesting part about being part of a
an organisation like JLL is that, you know, that there are all sorts of people who are working in valuations in particular, I think is a really untapped resource, but they don't, it's really about changing how they think about things, and this study itself will really help, I think, in opening up people's minds to areas that they really do. I think valuations people already take these things into account naturally. Like if you walk into a space that has all the hallmarks of health and well-being, they'll naturally be adding more value to that than to something that doesn't. But in order to get them to actually say, well, this is the increase in percentage, they'll say there's a positive impact, but to actually commit to something like that, I think is really, I think the people who are, I think the big home builders who have these frameworks in place know that already. You can see, I would say, speaking to, say, the residential agents in my building, who I wouldn't say are all converts to the sustainability cause, they can point to somebody like Barclay as someone who has a high quality product, and it's because of their holistic approach. It's not just about the kitchen or the bathroom, it's about your walk to your front door and also all that surrounds it. So I think that's why I really think placemaking is a place where sustained people who care about the planet can actually get some foothold, is because there are actual businesses who are getting benefit from that. So I think it's already happening.
So let me sort of challenge on top of that. So listening to the four of you today, there's some absolutely wonderful ideas in terms of what we need to do. But do you think we have the right skills in the industry to deliver all those things? So in terms of placemaking, in terms of understanding about the materials we use in a building, in terms of the impact they have, all of that sort of knowledge, all of that science, and Andy talked about science, and I think Peter talked about science as well. Do we have the right skills to drive that agenda? Or are we just going to stick with what we know? I can ask it to all of you guys, so just because you're speaking, you don't need to.
Well, I suppose I would challenge this valuation thing. I mean, my experience of valuers is they work on a comparables basis, so not necessarily on a qualitative basis. So if there's a shift, that's great. But the issue we've got in southern England, frankly, is housing is just so unbelievably mentally expensive.
Yes.
What we actually need is things that reduce valuations, so that people can actually buy, young people can buy houses. So I think as an industry, we just can't continue to rely on this gravy train of ever increasing values, and we've got to be careful that as the qualitative people, we're not actually driving values up continuously just as a self-serving exercise. So I'd be very cautious about that. I think we've got to really innovate now in housing delivery models to make housing affordable, whilst remembering that we need to get the qualitative stuff right. In terms of skills, I mean, as it stands, we've got a big problem, haven't we? Basically, we've said, to dear old Johnny Foreigner, heave ho, mate, we don't do Johnny Foreigner anymore. And he and she has got a huge amount of the technical and professional skill, particularly in our industry, that we need. So it's quite a moment, actually, and I don't know what the answer to it is, but I would say at the moment, no, we haven't got the skills. Yeah. Absolutely. And all you'll see is tiny pockets of expertise in a sea of unskilled people who don't really know very much about what they're doing.
Yeah. So as delegates that want to come here today, do you feel you're being skilled up? Are you challenging the design of buildings? Are you listening to these comments and actually trying to make developments different?
I work for a number of housing associations, and we never set out to build bad housing.
Sure.
We never set out to provide poor indoor air quality.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, far too many of the schemes we've built in the last 5 years or so are showing latent defects. Post-occupancy evaluations are showing enormous gaps. So I think the most potent and memorable quote from the four presenters this morning was Joe with, are we getting what we are designing?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, we're not. We're spending more money on consultants to try and get it right up front. We are trying to find decent site supervisors. What is commissioning? It's a word that's in a dictionary, but we never see it on the site. We see people sign the commissioning forms off, but they're not, they bear no resemblance to what the manufacturers design or the designers design. So the skill, we're finding real difficulty. The cost is going up and up and up as we're all chasing a few good quality consultants or supervisors, clerks of works, to try and get ours right.
Yes, yes.
And beggar my neighbour.
Yes, yes.
Although we used to be a movement, now we're just developers like everybody else.
Yeah.
And we're also finding the consumer is far more demanding.
Right.
The leaseholders, they're driving quality. There's no regulation. You know, we're trying to beat the regulations, go higher
Yes,
all the time.
yes, yes, yes.
And then we're up against the financiers who say, well, you don't need to do that. What's the benefit?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're battling. We haven't given up.
No.
But hell, I think we're losing.
Right, okay.
I mean, just on the all-party parliamentary group committee, there were some pretty shocking stories about, you know, the performance after the building had been designed and built, and failures, you know, systemic sort of failures in some cases, which I think shocked some of the members of the panel. But, I mean, they were really mostly lay people, so MPs who don't actually understand the industry, and they got to the bottom of the fact that a lot of processes get sort of cut out of building homes. So if you go to a site, there is a rather typical scenario where you won't have the sort of on-site management intensively in the way that you used to have. You don't have the clerks of works inspecting everything. There's greater reliance on the inspection regime, building control or warranties to actually deliver the quality. So there's a complete misunderstanding of who's responsible for the quality delivery on site. So that was one of the recommendations, is that house builders or the industry should put in place much more rigorous quality processes.
Yeah.
And I think Pete mentioned, you know, ISO 9001 and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, all architects operate to a really rigid quality regime, and yet you don't see that translated on site. Am I
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point. Good
Can I just say, when I was in, I mean, I started development in North Carolina, actually, in the United States, and actually you cannot be a general contractor in North Carolina without state certified qualifications. You know, we often think the free market's crazier in the US than here. Actually, not at all. The regulation of the states, and I would say we need that here. We need properly qualified developers and contractors now who need to be certified to do the job. There's just the number of cowboys now in our industry is extraordinary.
More questions? Okay, no. Yeah,
So,
please.
There's a lot of discussion about placemaking and community. So I'm wondering, does that mean that as developers, perhaps you've got a responsibility to develop the community after the products have been, well, the house has been sold and built and sold? How long should that care responsibility care go on?
Well, Barclays, I mean, I know were mentioned, but they take social sustainability very seriously. We didn't mention that at all that much. But, you know, how communities are built, how neighbourhoods are developed, how they're balanced, mixed. What is the mix, and are they happy with, you know, are you getting the feedback loop from them?
Yeah.
And I think Barclays are a bit of a beacon. I agree, you know, it could be deemed to be quite commercially oriented, but I mean, why not? If they're getting the right outcome, you know, why not be commercial about it? So, you know, they've got some good processes in place.
So your question, you're asking how long should you be?
How long do you
it's-
care?
yeah,
How long
it's-
do you continue to engage with them? How long do you
Yeah.
continue to help them? Yeah.
I think, well, I don't have a huge amount of knowledge in this area, but I would say there are things like CICs, which are community investment, I can't remember, committees, where you're actually trying to set things in place when you're starting it off so that it ends up being self-sustaining.
Yes.
So you don't really, obviously, as a speculative house builder, you don't want to be there for the next 20 years. That's not your business model, but that you set these structures up so that they end up being self-sustaining.
And it almost comes back to that issue about local authorities. Should they enable those parts of the process, not just about the housing growth, housing numbers, but actually getting the right design of communities and in place is a fundamental part of making that local authority, that area successful. So yeah, I think you're right.
Because there's some things like, I think it's called Echo in the Olympic Village. There's a kind of online bartering, almost where you, not bartering, but just kind of local resources available. So, and one of them is having people over for dinner at your house as a way of having people in the, they would have someone from the surrounding neighborhood who they obviously kind of helped to put themselves forward, but they would invite people from the new neighborhood in, and the local authority would pay for the food or something, so that it was a way of helping to make connections between people that could then eventually.
But it does become interesting as we become more wide and more connected. Hopefully those connections can be real and virtual and actually make those things happen more frequently. There's a question there, yes?
Well, it wasn't so much a question, just a statement. I work for Barclays,
Okay.
and they've used the toolkit quite a few times. Just sort of going back to your point, one of the main aims of it is really thinking about, as a developer, how can we sort of help to start creating a sense of community that eventually will take ownership of that development for the long term. And that's actually one of the main drivers, or one of the key drivers of the toolkit, is we're not going to manage that development for forever.
Yes.
But what's going to happen after that? And it's just sort of making sure that framework, that structure is in place to do that successfully for the long term.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just add?
Yeah, please.
Sorry,
do.
just to say, I think with a new build community, there's a really important opportunity when people kind of first move in to create that community feel. And I experienced it moving into a new build block of flats, and it's almost like, you know, when you have a baby and you go along to the parent group, everybody's kind of got something in common. And moving into a new community, you've got something in common, you're kind of all finding your way, and it's a really good time to establish those community links and those community groups and things, and I think there's a lot the developer can do to facilitate that, and then hopefully they become self-sustaining over time.
Can I just add to that, because I share the management board at One Brighton, which is a development that I did at Burridle, containing 350 people, and all I'd say is it is such a different thing managing the building after handover. I mean, it's completely changed my perception actually of what goes on. So I would say never impose it on the developer, because they just will not have the skill set to do it, and you'll just frustrate the hell out of them.
Good point.
But I would say that you know, some sort of community animation as part of what you might call actually sort of social commissioning should be part of the development process. But as a developer, I've got to say, these projects go on for so bloody long. You don't want them to feel like you're involved forever. You need a sense of conclusion. So it's fine for a developer to vacate, I think, a development, but just, you know, the obligation should be to leave it in good social and community order before they do.
Good point. Good point.
Can I just
Last question,
ask you a question? Because it seems in the air to be a change of those who develop housing for instant exit and those who are developing housing in the future for long term.
Yes.
And how you think that's going to impact on the market. The last discussion is probably common area, but and whether or not that will have an impact on quality and how people look for longer term investment in property rather than the quick escape.
That's a really good challenge, actually, really good challenge. Who wants to pick that one? That was the last question.
Well, I mean, I lived in one of those in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, a big community PRS development built for the long term, designed for the long term. And actually what I found was, interestingly, we sort of used to push the building managers to one side and just do our own stuff. We felt it was kind of impositional, like, let's have a party, let's have, you know, it was like, piss off, you know. We'll have a party when we as a community want a party.
Yes.
So it can be a bit fake. I mean, even in the States, people think this is properly fake. So I would say think very carefully about that. In terms of long-term investment, yes, fine, but don't forget PRS buildings get trashed by tenants and really battered to pieces. So they've got to be designed with tremendous robustness actually to take that.
I think that was my point. That actually it might change the mindset of material selection and design.
Yes, I think that's a good.
Well, the question is whether that will then translate into the new build for sale sector. I think house builders are pretty canny. They'll say, well, this is PRS, so it's robust. This is private for sale, so it's private for sale.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you'll get a translation.
And it'll continue to be that way until we don't have such a dearth of supply.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's really what's working against all this stuff is it's hard enough to find a place that's in a location that works for you and that you can afford, let alone compare it with something else so that you can have a choice about what the materials are and things like that.
It's going to be very interesting to see how local authorities and joint ventures work into the future. I mean, how local authorities now are having to put their assets together and create vehicles, joint venture vehicles, to deliver homes for their area. I mean, I'm hopeful that local authorities will actually be able to influence the way in which developers develop for them. And they should be thinking about an asset for 20, 25, 30 years instead of just for the present, as you say. And funding from government was always geared to the number of units they would build rather than quality. So even housing associations suffered from being screwed down on quality to some degree by that process. But housing associations, again, very long-term view, should be thinking about how robust those buildings are into the future.
Brilliant. Thank you. At that point, we're going to stop. So can you thank the speakers in Norway for this first session?